So today we're going to show you how we're pouring a slip cast mould, and it's a vintage mould. Now this got water damage and it was sitting in my shed for a long time, but when I opened it I realised it was actually okay inside. So this is a gorgeous chook and we've sold quite a lot of these. We generally don't multicolour them. We put a different coloured glaze, all over glaze. So yeah, so we're going to show you for the beginning stage of pouring the mould, actually firing the greenware, the bisc and then the glaze, the whole process. So stay tuned. This is a 120 gauge sieve, so it's very fine. I use a washing up scrubbing brush to take it off the side so that you don't get these chips, but of course the mistake I made was not doing that and leaving the lid off, so I'm having to properly sieve a really fine sieve. Because I left it in the bucket, I'm just trying to get all the thicker clay from the side that the drill bit isn't actually getting. So, and then we're going to run it through the sieve. Oh. So you can see all the particles that really shouldn't be in your slip when it's left. So this just gives you an example, going through this fine mesh sieve, just how many different particles and bigger particles that shouldn't be in the slip. So now I have a beautiful contaminant-free, lump-free bit of slip to pour. It's really important when you are slip casting to have enough slip for your moulds, otherwise you'll end up with a line if you have to refill, and it's really annoying. So this is only a very little bit of leftover slip, so I'm going to use my slip mixer in a minute and we'll come back, fill up the jug and pour a mould. You can see all these little bits, not only lumps, but it's quite gritty. And that is why we sieve our slip. The first step is making sure that the mould is clean of any previous castings, any extra clay, and I just use my handy Sephora makeup brush. I've had it for years. It is the best brush for wiping, or at least dusting off. All moulds have reference points in them, so they're easy. Even if this wasn't a shape, if it was a bowl or something a little bit more simple, you would know exactly where your references are to pop the mould together. And then when a mould is poured, there's an awful lot of force. There have been a couple of situations where I've poured something and the rubber bands have not been enough and there's been a disastrous mess of slip that's poured out. So when the clay is poured in, it is initially a huge amount of pressure. It gets pushed out. So we're going to make sure, I actually need some new rubber bands, but you can either use straps, but this one, we'll take a few different ones. These ones are almost on the way out, so. And why we use plaster is that it draws the moisture out of the clay, which leaves a skin. And so essentially when we're pouring, most of that slip will be poured out again. That's why certain, like for instance, silicone and other non-porous moulds are not suitable for clay. But I've only got thin ones at the moment, so I've got to get some more of these thicker ones that are leftover rubber from something that came with a whole lot of the moulds. So, but they are perishing, a lot of them at the moment, and so I had to get, for the purposes of this, I bought some new rubber bands, but these were the thickest I could get. Okay. Another thing that you can do, just to make sure that everything's lined up, is look into the mould, and if you can't see daylight or you can't see any light coming through, you should be safe to go. Very gentle stream. Oh my God, that's just enough. We also poured just, I've just gone a little bit too far there, but basically you fill the slip so that it is just over the edge of the top of the mould, and therefore as the mould dries and forms a skin, that will drop. So I'll just wipe that off. When this is dried a bit, I'll take it off. But in the interim, you're probably going to ask, how long do you leave the mould, the slip in the mould before you pour it out again? Okay, what you want is a plastic knife, and we want probably about, what's that, about 1/4 of an inch thickness or a little bit less. Anyway, normally you can do it by eye once you've been doing it for a while. But as you can see, and I'll get H to come forward, is as the skin starts to form on the outside, see how that is way too thin. So essentially what you see at the top is going to be the thickness of the piece that you actually have at the end of the day. So you want it to be able to support itself and not too thin, especially when you're starting out slip casting. Better to be thick to start with than thin. Those pieces just won't form strong bisque if they're too thin. When it stops being shiny, and still it's still a bit shiny there, but here it's not, so I'll just wait for that, otherwise it'll leave a bit of a mess on the top of the mould and we will slide it off. But you can see as mould dries in the plaster, it's actually a really good way to see how it dries in the plaster, and as soon as it's not shiny in that little bit there, I mean obviously if I was working on my own I would just take it off probably now, but I will just leave it there so you can see. So we're just taking the top of that off. The other thing that I was taught very early on when I started slip casting and using moulds was, don't ever use metal against moulds because it cuts into the plaster. So I see a lot online where people are actually using metal sort of pottery tools to cut excess clay off a mould, and essentially what you're doing is grabbing it, and you're chipping the plaster. So not good for the clay and certainly not good for your moulds. The clay has dropped as it's being drawn out into the mould. The clay has dropped already from the top of the mould down. Now I know that this doesn't form the part of the chicken at this point. This is the foot anyway, but I also know from experience that essentially they make this collar, which is this section here, so that you've always got a consistent foot on a piece, a two-piece. Okay, so we're ready to go and pour it out. So they're really heavy. Because we're only pouring out one mould today for the purpose of this exercise, I'm just going to use a bucket and a rack and something to prop up, and we just generally use offcuts of our framing so that the mould is on an angle and pours out evenly. So essentially we're going to lift this up. Okay, pour it out. Into the bucket.
Probably good enough to do more bunnies out of this.
Yeah, I would say so.
And do you want chalk?
And we're going to leave that there on an angle until it's fully drained, and we'll come back in a minute. Okay, we're ready to turn it up. Looks pretty good in there. Let's see how it's gone. My many rubber bands, just in case.
How long do you generally leave them?
This has been left for about 20 minutes or a bit more, half an hour maybe. Let's just hope it works. Ta-da! So as you can see, this is the foot that we'll cut off, and we're going to leave this to set a little bit longer in the mould before I demould it. and once it's a bit more leather dry, because it's quite soft, I'll take the foot off, and yeah, so we're very excited. It's a beautiful little mould, and being vintage, I don't know how many more we'll get out of it because we've only got the one, but we love it, and it is a bit of cottagecore for those who love chooks, chickens, chooks as we call them in Australia. Okay, so you'll be able to see it's already started separating from the edge here, and so we want that really clearly to be separating the whole way around before we demould. So we'll show you that process once we're at that point. We want that the whole way around before we demould, and it will come out relatively easily once it's ready. There's absolutely no reason to try it or touch it before it's ready. You're much better off leaving it just a tiny bit too long before you risk cracking than taking it out early and you just lose the form. It's still very wet clay, and it's got beautiful detail on this particular piece, so we don't want to risk any of that detail being lost by touching it too soon. Here's our chook, ready to dry. And we made another one earlier, so you can see what it looks like with bisc. And you'll see the shrinkage rate. It's quite good, isn't it? You can see the shrinkage rate.